From the rugby pitch to the field of business, Mick Kearney has had an action-packed career, bringing tried and tested business models to the Irish market. This is the Architects of Business, Joe's weekly series of interviews with leading business people in partnership with EY Entrepreneur of the Year. I'm Tadhg Enright, and today we'll hear from Mick Kearney, a former Ireland rugby team manager and entrepreneur who brought snap printing and home instead senior care to Ireland. Mick, thank you very much for coming in and talking to us today. It's not often we have someone in the chair like you who's excelled so much in kind of two different fields, in elite sport and in business, and you're the kind of the perfect person to ask what the parallels between those two worlds are. What have you seen in your time?
Oh wow, that's a big opening question. So it is. I've obviously seen a number of parallels. Haven't been, I suppose, an entrepreneur for many years, gone back to 1984 and continuing on until I effectively got involved with the rugby team, which was back in 2012. And I think probably the comparison that I would see is that I think the attention to detail is one thing that I really struck me. I think it's probably an error that a lot of business people make, maybe when they're making decisions to get involved in a business or buy a business. They don't actually do their due diligence. I think due diligence is a massive part of what coaches do at a very senior level, as in, the Joe Schmidts of this world. And like Joe's attention to detail, it is legendary. And it's absolutely as good as people say it is. Obviously, experiencing that firsthand over a period of 5 years, it was quite extraordinary in that there's no stone left unturned in any aspect of the preparation. And, that includes preparation both on the pitch and off the pitch. I know one of the earlier meetings that Joe had, he got the players together and they came up with a terminology that they felt encompassed what they actually wanted to be and wanted to become. And that was basic excellence, everyone, every time. And I think that maybe sums it up quite well, in that everybody had to be excellent at what they did, both in terms of their preparation, in terms of their hydration, in terms of their sleep, in terms of their performance on the pitch. And I honestly think that business could learn an awful lot from that. I think, one of business's failings, I think, is that there is sometimes a lack of that attention to detail. And that comes through, I think, in particular in terms of maybe managing a multitude of people and giving them, honest feedback and giving them, I suppose, the tools to help make them successful. That, people take on, employees, and they don't actually give them the time and effort to actually make them better employees. And there isn't that consistent feedback, consistent level of improvement that you actually need.
In the way that you have on a sports team?
Absolutely. I mean, I think every month, every 3 months, every 6 months, I think that the game is evolving and you have to keep up with that. So the coaches are working extremely hard at looking at trends. I think it's another thing that coaches are really good at. They actually study the opposition massively. It's not something that would be that common in business, that you would study your opposition in absolutely minute detail, or as much as you actually can. I mean, with video analysis now and all matches being televised around the world, there's no secrets. But at the same time, I remember when Joe came in initially, traditionally there would have been maybe 5 or 6 players picked out of the opposition, and there would have been maybe a 3 or 4 minute video done on them. When Joe came in, Joe insisted on not only the starting 15 of the opposition be monitored, but also their bench, and also maybe any potential players that might come into the team over the course of the year. So it added a lot of extra work into the video analysis, but it meant that our players were incredibly well prepared in terms of who they were marking and what they would expect from their opposition.
So listen, before you kind of transition, because you were a player once yourself, and sadly to bow out at a relatively young age, before you kind of made that transition into the world of business, what was it like as a sportsman? Was a career in business always at the back of your mind as the kind of a thing to do post retirement?
Not really. I mean, I do think that life kind of it throws up a lot of challenges, and it throws up an awful lot of opportunities as well. And I look back at my time. I was in Castleknock College for 6 years. I came from a farming background. I always expected, to be honest with you, and it was expected of me that I would go and I would work in the family business, cattle dealing and farming, after I left school. I did that pretty well straight away. Went to Ag College for a year and then went back to the farm. Met the love of my life, Eugenie, when I was 21 years of age, and got married when we were 20. I was 24, she was 23 or 24, 25. And within a year, we had our first wedding anniversary in Perth in Western Australia. And how that came about basically was that and it's not, I don't think it's that unusual, I think, with fathers and eldest sons, and when land and farms are involved. We had I suppose, we'd call it maybe a misunderstanding, but it was probably a little bit more serious than that. So we decided really that there was no future really staying at home. And we emigrated to Perth in Western Australia. My wife is a nurse, so she got a job in Royal Perth Hospital pretty well straight away. I had no real qualification, landed in a big city, stayed in a big city for the first time, and I really did not know what to do. I got involved in coaching with a team called Cottesloe Rugby Club, and met a man called Paddy Thompson, who was from Mount Mellick in County Laois. Paddy happened to be the CEO of Snap Printing in Australia at the time. Paddy offered me a job as a trainee printer, right down at the bottom of the scale. I worked my way up to kind of centre manager level pretty quickly. They were the biggest franchise in Australia from a print point of view. And then in a very kind of funny kind of way, Paddy then offered me to buy a franchise in either Queensland or come back to Ireland. And buy the master franchise for Ireland, which was obviously a massive opportunity, but Ireland back in 1984 was a complete basket case in that interest rates were 16-17%, unemployment was the same, Ireland was on its knees. And Paddy actually came home to look at the opportunity, came back to Perth, and he said to me, Mick, he said, don't touch it. He said, do not go near it, okay? So we then came home for a family wedding in March 1984, and my wife is one of the eldest of 12 children, and we pretty well had made our decision to go back to Queensland and open up the first Snap franchise on the Gold Coast. And my wife was telling her father that we'd made the decision that we were going to go back, and he started to cry. And based on that decision, we actually stayed at home.
So it was the draw of family brought you back, like so many.
It was the draw of
immigrants.
family, exactly. And like, you know, you talk about business planning and you talk about due diligence and you talk about all of these things, and sometimes it's just you make emotional decisions, and that was 100% an emotional decision. We opened up Snap in June 1984, and it never really looked back, to be honest with you. We were profitable within the first 2 or 3 months, and it grew very rapidly to become Ireland's leading print and design group, and thankfully it's still going strong today.
Was it offering something different in the Ireland of the time? You talk about 1984, interest rates were out of control, unemployment was probably as high as it's ever been since the birth of the state. You know, what was Snap's offer back then?
Paddy had a great saying that he had 3 things, and the letters were ISQ: image, service and quality. And he said, if you actually have a good image, if you have a good service and you have good quality, he said you'll be successful no matter what you do. I do think that the service that we gave, like I had this, I suppose, unbelievable fear of failure really, and I think it's another maybe common trait in entrepreneurs that they don't actually. I think there's a humility in most entrepreneurs that I would meet, and I think most of them actually have a fear of failure rather than this great anticipation of success when they start off in business. And certainly when I started off in Snap, it was 100% a fear of failure that actually drove me on. I worked really hard at it. I had some very good contacts. Remember in particular Robbie Kelleher from Davy Stockbrokers gave me a great turn earlier on. And all I could think of was, well, that pays my rent now for this month or whatever. And it was literally going from day to day, week to week. And suddenly it started to steamroll and we got more customers, and I used my contacts well. But I think very much, you know, people buy off people at the end of the day. And I think I don't necessarily think you have to be a good salesperson, but I think if you're a good networker, if you're a good relationship person, if you can talk to people, if you care about people, I think you can actually do very well in business. You don't have to be a smart salesperson to get ahead.
And you've got networks like this one, the EY Entrepreneur of the Year, and you've also got the sporting network that you will have built up around yourself. Was that particularly advantageous?
Very, very helpful, yeah. Like I joined Lansdowne pretty well straight after school. and lucky enough to play for the senior team there for 3 or 4 years, and made a lot of friends. And it's funny, you think you make a lot of your friends probably through boarding school and all that, but most of my friends, the vast majority of them, actually came through Lansdowne, and that network were certainly extremely supportive and helpful to me, especially when I was starting off. I'm now a trustee of the club, so I go back there on a very regular basis. All my friends from 30 years ago are still all my friends today, which is great. And I must say there's a fantastic, I think, network of people I think in most rugby clubs, but I think in particular down in Lansdowne.
So how did you start to, shall we say, spread the branches of Snap around the country? I mean, talk to me about the journey from the first to the second to maybe the third, fourth and fifth.
Initially, it was mainly through kind of family and friends, funnily enough. I think my second franchise was my brother Paul, and my third franchise was a guy called John Dawson from Lansdowne, who worked with me for a while. I think the fourth might have been somebody else who worked with me. The fifth might have been another brother. So it's quite interesting, really. I think when I look back on it and I look at, say, the the situation at home and the family business and all that, and I think it probably quite ironic that I ended up bringing a franchise back to Ireland, and two of my brothers and one of my sisters actually got involved as franchisees and all did very well out of it.
So that was how you built it. It wasn't that you started spreading out your own network and then maybe franchising at a later stage. It was the second, third and fourth.
They were franchised straight away.
All franchised straight away.
Yeah, I mean, the first one was really successful, and I think that's one of the I think it's one of the key kind of things of a franchise, is that number one pilot operation has to be successful.
It's got to be, yeah.
And if that doesn't work, well, then it's very difficult to go out and sell it to other people. So the one originally in Andrew Street and then moved to Dane Street, that was a really successful Snap, and was in the top kind of 2 or 3 between Ireland and Australia in terms of revenues and profitability. So it worked really well very, very quickly. So I didn't have any difficulty in actually selling the concept to others, but the key moment, I think, probably was when in about 1990, 91, 92, I knew that there was a big network out there to be tapped into and that we could franchise this way more than what I was doing. But I was actually so busy in my own operation in James Street that it was very difficult for me to I suppose, do both jobs. Yeah. So came across a guy called Ed Murphy. Ed, a good Wexford man, and Ed was coming back from America. And I met Ed one day, and we spoke for about 3 or 4 hours about sport and we just gelled. We actually just created this kind of incredible bond straight away. I don't know whether it's ever happened to you that you meet somebody and suddenly you feel, you've met somebody who's going to be a friend for life, and it's actually turned out that way. So Ed is this year my partner for 26 years. We've been partners through a lot of ups and downs, lots of ins and outs. It hasn't all been one way, but still fantastic friends. We've never fallen out, even though we've had lots of arguments. But I would definitely give Ed, the vast majority of the credit for the success of the rollout of Snap back in the kind of late 90s when things were beginning to take off.
What was your sales pitch to potential franchisees? Because I mean, the reason I ask that is that sometimes when it comes to people looking to get into a business, you got the franchise. It's like the off-the-shelf model. You're buying into a brand name, into a business model, into an approach. But I guess different deals are structured in different ways, and some people will criticize franchising, saying, you're just buying the right to be a store manager and sending loads of your profits off to HQ. How is Snap different to that?
Well, I would describe franchising as getting into business for yourself but not by yourself, number one. Okay, so I do think that the network around you is hugely important. Your best salespeople are the existing franchisees. Okay, so if for instance you come in looking for a franchise for Home Instead, I would insist that you actually go around to at least 10 of the offices and ask every question, completely open book policy, and find out all about whether it's Mick, whether it's Ed Murphy, whether it's other people that we've involved in the business. But we would be very open and transparent, and I don't think in the many years I've been selling franchises that I ever actually went to sell one. I've always actually explained the opportunity. I've given them a look at the P&L. I've shown them and given them proof of what people could do in year 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. I've then explained to them how difficult it's going to be, and actually I would almost try and put them off buying the franchise rather than actually encourage them to buy. Because
is this reverse psychology?
It's a little bit of reverse psychology, but it's also, I think, being a reality as well, because when you get into business for yourself, it's completely different to going into a job Monday to Friday. I think you have to work a huge amount of hours. There's the pressure on the family. We would always insist that we would meet the partner if that person has a partner, and explain, you're not going to be seeing as much as him or her as you have over the last year or two. They're going to have to work very hard. There's going to be financial pressure. You're not going to make money in your first year, so you need enough capital to get you through that. And hopefully then in the second year you'll make a little bit of money, but it is not a quick fix. I think, getting into any business, I think it's
a hard slog, and
it's a hard slog.
And you've been through it as well.
It's a hard slog, and you need to be brave. I really think you need to be brave, and I've great admiration for people who actually take that plunge into business, because it's very much a different sort of pressure to working in a 9-to-5 job.
And you talked there earlier about all the highs and lows that you went through, including with your business partner. Talk to us about some of those low points and how you got through them.
Interesting. We got through them with a lot of difficulty, Tadhg, to be honest with you. And there was one in particular back in the kind of late 1990s, at the time of the .com boom. We got involved in a .com business called printorigin.com. We actually invested in it well in excess of €1 million, £1 million actually at the time ourselves into it, and then we raised some money from private investors as well. We ended up, it was a print portal where people could come in and get quotes and buy print from one central portal, okay? And we had great ambition. We were going to go to Europe, we were going to go to America. And this is the way the .com thing worked back then. I'm not sure, you're probably a little bit too young to remember it, but there was a time when a company called Baltimore Technologies was worth more than Bank of Ireland, and Bank of Ireland had £1 billion worth of profit at the time, and Baltimore didn't have any revenues. So it was all a little bit skewed, the whole thing. It really was, and
still is to a degree.
To a degree, it is, yeah. But at least there's more there's more to it now, I think, than there would have been back then.
More road behind it. But
so we actually ended up, and we lost a very significant amount of money. And we closed it down a day or two after 9/11. So that was within kind of 2.5 years of opening, and all the money was gone, and we couldn't raise any more money because the markets literally shut down after 9/11, and the world was not in a good place. So myself and Ed, who was in the business with me, we went back into Snap. I went back into Dame Street, my tail between my legs. Ed went back to the corporate office, tail between his legs. And for the next kind of 3 or 4 years, we tried to make back what we'd lost. And it really was, we literally lost pretty well everything that we'd made in the previous 10 years. And it had gone down into this black hole of software and .com, and we had to struggle to come out of it. But we just got back on it, and we tried to be positive about it, but it wasn't easy.
What had gone wrong?
The market had gone wrong, number one. We came very close to getting it across the line. There was a company called Bertelsmann, which are a massive German company, and we had a number of meetings with them, and they were on the verge of buying in a significant part of it and investing a lot of equity into it. And we ran out of money at the end of the day. Like, they pulled the plug around that time, and we just literally ran out of money.
And
But it was a lesson. It was a great lesson.
Yeah, I mean, how have you taken the lessons and applied them to...
I suppose I'd go back to maybe what I said originally about due diligence. I don't think we did enough due diligence on it. I think we were... sometimes you can be overexcited about the opportunity and you don't look at the negative side of things. And I think you always have to weigh up the negatives and the positives. And I think back then we were just so kind of engrossed by the idea that we didn't look at any of the negatives. And it was a lesson. And I actually think we learned from the lessons. And you know, I think another point I would make about business and about failure in particular is that I think everybody is prone to failure, but it's only a failure if you don't actually learn from it. And everybody can recover from it. So people can get very down in the dumps if they fail, right? And that's very difficult. But if you learn from it, I don't see it as failure. One of the other things I did back then, I remember, there was about 35 or 40 private investors involved in funding Print Origin, and I would say I probably knew about 32 of them. So that made it maybe a little bit more difficult. So I rang the company who was looking after it, and I said, listen, can you give me the names and phone numbers of all the investors? And I literally locked myself away for 2 days, and I rang every single one of them. I explained the situation to them and let them know that their money was completely gone. And you know what? Apart from one person, they all really appreciated the phone call. and they just said, listen, thank you very much for giving me a heads up, hard luck, best luck in the future, and there was no issue. There was only one person that gave me a hard time. And the thing I actually learned from that particular experience was that if you confront the kind of reality and the harsh reality of stuff early on, and you deal with it, it's actually an awful lot better than hiding away from it. I think a lot of people can fail, and next thing they just want to hide themselves away. They don't want to face people. They don't want to talk to anybody about it. They don't want to, I think there's a saying, confront the brutal facts. And actually, if you do confront the brutal facts and you actually deal with that stress in your life of wondering, what will that person say to me when I walk down the street and meet him across the street in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time, if I haven't told them what's happening, or what will happen if I have told them. And it was completely different. And to me, it's one of the great kind of stress relievers, is to deal with your problems as quickly as you possibly can.
I'm sensing another sporting analogy here, Mick, and it's, when you get knocked down, you just pick yourself. You have to just pick yourself up.
You have to, yes,
and go at it again.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that I would have learned from observing the rugby players over many years is the level of resilience that they have. They've got an incredible ability to bounce back up and dust themselves down and get on to the next challenge. And like sport, it's funny, it's full. The disappointments are far more extreme in sport than they are in business. And the highs are probably far more high in sport than they are in business, because you don't get that adrenaline rush generally in business, and you don't get that severe disappointment. And your disappointments in sport are very public disappointments. And your mistakes in sport are very public disappointments. Whereas your mistakes in business, or your highs or lows, are actually, the office, 30 people, 40 people, yahoo, great. But when it comes to sport, there could be a million people that are kind of their mood is going to be affected by the outcome. So it adds a kind of a different dynamic. So that's an interesting part of it as well.
Okay, fascinating stuff.
I think the other point I'd make, just to your original question, I think hard work is a very underrated trait in people. And I look at, say, Joe Schmidt, and I look at his success with the Irish team, which has been absolutely phenomenal, and with Leinster going back before then. And people have often asked me, well, why has Joe been so successful? And I think probably, apart from his very high intelligence and great knowledge of rugby, I think the fact that he actually works harder than everybody else is a huge thing. Like, Joe will study rugby, 18 hours a day. The players that are under his guidance will know exactly where they stand with them. He won't have just looked at them in training. He looked at every thing that they've done in the previous 6 weeks before they come into camp with their province. He look at them training. He will be able to point out their good points, and he'll be able to point out their areas for improvement, and then he will actually coach them into improving those areas of improvement. So the level of hard work and detail that Joe puts into actually making players better players is extraordinary.
So, Mick, when did you decide that it was time to kind of, release the reins on Snap and look for the next thing?
Going back into Snap for the 3 or 4 years after the .com business went bust, that was kind of, it was tough, very tough in one way, because really you were actually going backwards, and we had to go backwards in order to go forward. So we had to recover financially. We had to recover psychologically a little bit, because no matter what people say, when something goes wrong in business, it does have an effect on your mind. So, but after 3 or 4 years, I remember sitting down with Ed one day and said, come on, let's go again. There must be something else here. We were still kind of in I was very much in my early 50s, and Ed was probably mid 40s. And we said, Ed, let's go and have a look around and see what's out there. So we started looking at franchises again. And again, I go back to the little bit of luck the large bit of luck that actually sometimes has to happen in order for you to get ahead. So we looked at a couple of franchises, and then one day we got a call from the American embassy, the commercial department in Dublin, to say that there was a Japanese lady from a company called Homestead Senior Care in town. And I remember Ed ringing me and saying, Mick, will we meet her and whatever. I said, yeah, listen, why not, whatever. And we met her, and she was a whirlwind, is all I can say. Myself and Ed had no idea about home care, and I'm telling you, we had no idea. Talk about experience in business, whatever. This was an area that we literally did not know the first thing about. So we got on a plane to Omaha in Nebraska. I'd say a week later. We were so excited by what she had to tell us that we got on the plane to Nebraska about a week later. And on St. Patrick's Day 2005, we signed a master franchise agreement for Ireland. And we still didn't know an awful lot about the business, to be honest with you. We did some training in Omaha. We'd no idea really how the business here operated. There was mainly been operated by, I suppose, through the black economy was probably the main kind of way people got their caregiver, agency basis. The caregiver turned up the door. The caregiver got paid directly by the person. There was no insurance. There was no Garda vetting. There was no real vetting of the caregiver. All of that type of stuff.
Well, tell us a bit more about what you had to learn about what home care or home instead did and does.
Well, what it does, we look after older people at home, okay, in order to make them comfortable, more independent, healthier, and to actually just keep them, I think, keep them happier for as long as we possibly can. The options back then were really kind of nursing home or family looking after them, or a very small selection of maybe caregivers coming through the HSE or whatever. And we came in and I think we professionalised the business. We spawned a huge number of competitors, which is interesting.
It's complementary almost.
It was complementary, and it was a little bit like snapping. That it started off, and the first one was really successful, and then it's funny, we found 3 really good franchisees within a year of opening the first one. Normally, you'd have to run a pilot for 12 months. And with this, we actually found 3 brilliant franchisees all together. They all went training together in Omaha in March of 2006, so less than about 9 months after we opened. And they came back and they set up straight away, and they were really successful. And it just went on from there, Tadhg. I mean, a massive need for it, obviously. The population is ageing. The over 75s are kind of going to double, I think, over the next 10 years. So there's a massive need for home care. And I think Home Instead genuinely do a fantastic job. We try and match up the caregiver to the needs of the older person. We try and match their personality, so that if, for instance, we have a client and they're interested in the theatre, we try and get a caregiver who might be interested in theatre. So it's very much it's not just a task orientated service. It's very much a companionship, looking after the person themselves rather than just looking after the home.
How does it work though? Because I mean, I think most people can understand the concept of a printing business franchise, and basically open a shop and you've got all the branded materials and you kind of say, we'll sort out your imaging needs. When it comes to setting up this network of carers, how does your business model
getting
apply to that?
caregivers is a massive challenge, because I would say that out of every 10 caregivers that apply for a job, we actually employ about maybe half of them. So with that half, we bring them in, we give them 20 hours solid training before they go anywhere. So they need to get their FETAC levels up over time as well. So we would never put a caregiver in with an older person who didn't have the qualifications to do and cover the needs of that particular older person. So for instance, if we have a client that has mid-range Alzheimer, for instance, or dementia, well then we would ensure that the caregiver going into that client would be well versed and well educated in the needs of that particular person. So we employ the caregivers, we train the caregivers, we then go out and we introduce the caregivers. We have nurses in all our offices that go out and actually quality control what the caregiver is doing. We go out and we meet the client and their family in their home to make sure that the home is safe. So we do a little bit of an audit on the home to make sure that the room is safe for the adult. And then there's constant monitoring of the caregiver as well. So there's a full office backup. Like most offices would employ somewhere between maybe 10 and 15 people back in the office. And that's everything from, recruitment to, managing the caregivers, quality control, answering the phone, meeting the families, networking, the medical backup with the nurse, etc.
It's a sector that, for someone such as yourself who was uninitiated in it at the beginning, it strikes me it must be quite tricky, because, caring for older people in their latter years, is you must hear some incredibly happy stories about the impact of what your people do, but also some very sad stories about where perhaps you just can't help. Or
it's you come across incredibly sad cases without a shadow of doubt, because you're dealing with the most vulnerable people in society. You're dealing with older people, but it's extraordinary when you can it's extraordinary how you can look after somebody living at home by just giving them maybe 2 or 3 hours help a day. They don't need full-time care in a nursing home, and they don't need full-time care at home. So if we go in the morning, we'll help them get out of bed, we'll make them their breakfast, we might make their bed, tidy up the house, and then we might go back that evening and give them an evening meal, medication reminders, all of that type of stuff. So they don't need a lot of help. And we have actually gone into houses with older people, and we have seen their quality of life improve dramatically, and also the quality of their family's life, because it can be very, very trying and very, very onerous on the family to be looking after their older parents, because they may have to work, they may have children of their own. So we fulfill almost a dual role, where we're looking after the older people, but we're also looking after their families and giving them the respite and the help that they need as well.
You point out, we do have an ageing population, and it's a good thing. Sometimes it's talked about in very negative terms, isn't it? But it's wonderful that medical science has helped us all live longer and healthier lives into our latter years. How much has Home Instead grown since you brought it here, and how much potential, I suppose, for growth do you see it having in the future?
Obviously we started off from scratch, but 12 and a half years ago, so it's not a long time to be in business. And from the time we opened up the first office, we now have 24 offices around the country, which means that we cover every what's called LHO, local health area within the country. Okay, so every HSE area within the country is covered by a Home Instead office. We're an approved supplier to the HSE, who actually give about the vast majority of our business actually comes from Home Instead, and then the rest comes from private clients and maybe some disability clients as well. So we've gone from 0 to 24 offices nationwide, and revenues this year will be somewhere in the region of about €70 million. So it's become a very, I suppose, substantial business. We employ about 4,500 caregivers on a daily basis. We've got about another 300 people that work throughout the offices throughout the country. So it's a massive employer as well as everything else. But we're constantly looking for new caregivers, because the demand is exceeding supply. And I think that's going to be the case over the next number of years.
Is it hard to find good caregivers?
It's challenging. It is challenging. And why that is, I suppose, the fact that 3-4 years ago, when we were in the midst of the economic crisis, unemployment was up around the 15-16%. Companies weren't bringing on new people, and now it's completely the opposite. Unemployment is down, I think, at as low as about 5.3 or 5.4%. I was reading yesterday where there's restaurants down the country and they just cannot get staff. They have to close because they cannot get staff. So there is a major staff shortage, not just in the caregiving area, but also I think in other areas as well. So we have to be very I think supportive of the caregivers that we have. We have to obviously look after them well, pay them well, and make sure that they're being really well looked after, so that we can hold on to what we have and then recruit new caregivers as we go along.
And what kind of traits do you need to find in them?
Empathy, I think, is a huge one. I think a desire to work with older people. I mean, that's one of the first questions we ask: do you like working with older people? Because if you've got somebody who does not like working with older people, well, then they're not going to be very good at the job. So I think empathy and then a real need to work with older people are the two key traits I would look for.
I mean, as a society, we're often, and not just Ireland, but other societies too, are often a kind of accused of ignoring our older folks or not taking care of them in the way that we should. I mean, I wonder if you think we're changing, or if we're becoming better at being friendlier to our the older among us.
I probably wouldn't agree with you that we haven't been friendly to our older people. I think that there's a massive respect for older people. I think that they contribute massively to society. I mean, even I think as grandparents looking after grandchildren, even you just take that one aspect of it, it's happening right throughout Ireland. The cost of childcare has gone through the roofs, and our grandparents are playing a far bigger role in looking after their grandchildren. I think that there's a massive role for older people in looking after older people, and I think that's a market that we would like to, I suppose, expand in terms of our caregivers. Like, you see people and they're retiring now 65, 66 years of age, but actually they could still work for another 10, 12, 14 years. So we've actually got some caregivers that are well into their 70s and some that are even into their 80s. My own mum is 87 years of age, and she goes and she visits a couple of people in hospital every week, and that's a form of caregiving. So there is an untapped market there, and obviously it would also help financially, for older people if they can go out and they can earn maybe a couple of €100 a week by doing 7 or 8 hours work.
I suppose I was talking about this kind of concept of loneliness, because I mean, while there will be some people out there blessed with big families who will always bring them in, but not everyone has a family, and people kind of just knocking in on elderly neighbours.
Yeah, I mean, it's something again that should be massively encouraged, I think. Loneliness is probably the biggest single challenge, because I think when people are lonely, they stop eating well, they don't go outside, and it's a really difficult situation, I think. And if loneliness could be, I suppose, brought to the forefront of people's minds, and actually, think about a neighbour down the road, she's living on her own, she is lonely, I can promise you she's lonely, and just call in and say, listen, would you like a cup of tea, or would you like to come up to me for a cup of tea? I think it would make a massive difference. Yeah. I really do.
So listen, you were saying there 12 years Home Instead has been operational in this country. Have you still got your kind of hands on the steering wheel, or are you in the back seat now?
I'm pretty well in the back seat. Like, it's quite funny. Like, when I got involved with the rugby, like, I did 2 years with the Irish under-20 team first, and then 5 years with the senior team. And that gave me the opportunity to kind of duck and dive, because nobody knew where I was half the time. And I've never really got back into it on a full-time basis. Been on the board of directors, and I've worked on certain projects as well. Similar with Snap, been on the board of directors there. We still have a decent shareholding in Snap. But I'd say I'm 63 now, and I justify my lifestyle at the moment by saying that I probably started to work when I was about 10 or 11 years of age, running around after cattle on the farm and doing the chores that kids do on farms. So I don't feel guilty, to be quite honest with you. I'm 63 next birthday. I've got a very nice house in the Hinch. I like to play golf. I like to go away on holidays. So I think you need stimulation and you need a sense of purpose. I'm still involved a little bit in the rugby, in that I'm on the national game board, and I'm obviously involved in Lansdowne as well. So I've lots of interests. I've kids that are involved in restaurants. So I don't think I'm a person that will never actually be kind of fully retired. But at the moment, I'm heading that way very quickly.
No, and I don't think anyone's trying to make you feel that way. But it's interesting you touched on that, especially in the world of enterprise. There's this kind of sense, lots of the entrepreneurs that we come and talk to here, they never want to stop. They're just going to keep going and going and going. Whereas a lot of people out there, I'm sure a lot in our audience, would be like, well, actually, I'm quite looking forward to chilling out once I've kind of earned my bit.
Well, I think it's interesting when you look at the age kind of thing as well, right? So if I left school at 18, I started work straight away. So I worked with my dad for 6 years. Then I went to Australia for 2 years. Then I came back with a master franchise for Snap, and I would think I was only 27 years of age. So like, I was really, really young at the time. And I literally worked 16, 17 hours a day for a long, long time after I came back from Australia. So some entrepreneurs don't become entrepreneurs until they're mid-40s. So I came an entrepreneur at mid-20s, so I'm 20 years ahead of the curve, if you know what I mean. So I don't think my wife would forgive me if I got back into another business, to be honest with you. So I'm very happy where I am in life. I'm kind of looking forward to having my kids get ahead, and I say they're interested in different things as well. And I do a fair bit of mentoring with ex-rugby players, current rugby players, other people. I'm very interested in that part of just helping others. It's a big thing in my own mind. That's just to use my experience, I suppose, to guide them as best I can.
The 16-hour days obviously no longer part of your present. But I mean, do you have any regrets about them, or is it just a necessary part of what you were doing at the time?
I've no regrets. like I consider, people ask me who do I admire, right? And like Paddy Thompson to me would be absolutely the person I would admire most, because Paddy gave me a chance at a very young age and he didn't have to. And I think that was extraordinary. So to get that lucky break, I think really kind of changed my whole life for the next 40 or 50 years. If I hadn't met Paddy, I don't know where I would have been. And I think that's kind of interesting, because people emigrate. Some people emigrate by choice, and some people emigrate because they have to emigrate. And I was one of those people that was somewhere in between. I kind of felt that my future back in the farm was obviously gone. It was over. So what was I going to do? So I didn't really emigrate by choice. And people that don't emigrate by choice go away always with the view of coming back. And I think the vast majority never come back, because they don't have the opportunity to come back. So I would consider myself extremely lucky that I had the opportunity to come back after going away.
So listen, in all the mentoring that you do with rugby players and perhaps also through the Entrepreneur of the Year program, what are your kind of golden rules? And is chilling out actually one of them?
I think work-life balance is probably one of them. But if you're a young fella and you've got 3 kids and you've got a mortgage, chilling out is not top of your agenda. Top of your agenda there is going to be try and make money and get ahead and make ends meet. What I would do as a mentor, I would try and get them to come up with their own thoughts on things, and then try and guide them if they're right or wrong. I get them to set kind of goals over the next 3 months. So if I mentor, say, 7 or 8 people, I'd meet them every 3 months religiously, and then I get them to set goals and targets for themselves within that 3 months. Then I would review them and then get them to set them again. And if I could make introductions, I'd make introductions. I mean, I think being part of the EY alumni is one of the great things I have, because not only for myself, because I really enjoy meeting the people and fellow entrepreneurs, but also being able to put, say, a rugby player in contact with, any one of maybe 170 or 80 entrepreneurs. I'd be pretty sure that if a player is an interest in this industry, I will be able to tap into one of the Entrepreneurs of the Year finalists to actually put them in touch with that. And that's a fantastic thing to do as well. So I would genuinely try and help them and avoid, I suppose, help them avoid falling into deep holes, because I've seen guys come to me with the most harebrained ideas, and I've just had to say to them, no, don't do that, right? And they really appreciate that advice, So you try and, I suppose, use your experience, good, bad, and indifferent, to help them along.
They might not be listening. What was the worst idea someone came to you with?
Oh God, that's a very good question, and I probably couldn't say it without maybe half identifying.
All right, we'll let you away with it.
Let me away without that one.
Mick Kearney, thank you very much. Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you, Tadhg. Nice to speak to you too.
Thanks for joining us today on The Architects of Business. Thanks to our guest, Mick Kearney, our producer, Patrick Hohey, and all of the team here at Joe. Our programme is made in partnership with EY Entrepreneur of the Year. Go to JOE.ie to learn more about the finalists for this year. And don't miss out on past or future editions of The Architects of Business by subscribing for free on iTunes, on your favourite Android podcast app, or you can watch the show on YouTube too. While you're at it, check out some of Joe's other podcasts, including Ireland Unfiltered and House of Rugby. I'm Tadhg Enright. Thanks for being with us today, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.